Welcome to the Flower Lounge, a place for conversations with wildly creative people and a little plant-loving wisdom to help you experience life in full bloom. I'm Katie Hess, flower alchemist and founder of LOTUSWEI, and I believe in a world where we're all living at our personal edge. Welcome to the Flower Lounge. I am super thrilled for this week's guest. I have been following his work like a stalker for a while now on Instagram. And so I want to introduce you to Diego Perez, who is a meditator, a writer, and a speaker, who is most widely known on Instagram and various social media networks through his pen name, Young Pueblo. The name Young Pueblo means young people, and it serves to remind him of his Ecuadorian roots, which I'm sure he'll tell us more about. His experiences in activism and the collective of humanity is in the midst of important growth. Diego's practice of Vipassana meditation, as taught by S.N. Goenka, has given him a deep understanding of liberation that inspires his written work. Through writing and speaking, he aims to support the healing of the individual, knowing that when people release their personal burdens, it helps humanity build a global peace. Through poems, quotes, and short essays, he explores the reality of self-healing, the movement from self-love to unconditional love, and the wisdom that comes when we truly work toward knowing ourselves. Diego studied at Wesleyan University and is currently living in my favorite city, New York City. And he has a new book that he just launched at ABC in New York, and it's available on Amazon right now, and it's titled Inward. And if you are interested in following his work, which everyone should be, you can find him on Instagram at young_Pueblo. So thank you so much, Diego, for being with us today.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. This is going to be so fun.
I can't wait to dive in. Yeah. So the first question I'm dying to know is about your pen name and how you started your work and what led you to, because if I look back on your Instagram account, there were the days of the photos and the daily life.
Yeah,
And
you were following for that long, right?
At some point you made the switch to words, and and you are Diego and you are Jung. So tell me about that.
Totally. So I think you covered it briefly, but I use the name Young Pueblo, so it doesn't actually describe me, but it serves as a reminder to me, specifically around my Ecuadorian roots. So I was born in Ecuador and I came to the United States when I was 4 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And in the city that I was born in, Guayaquil, it refers to the word pueblo means the masses of people, particularly masses of impoverished people. And those are really my roots. So I like, being reminded of that often. And the other part of it is that as soon as I started meditating, it became pretty clear to me that humanity as a whole, the whole collective of humanity as one, we were really young. There are a lot of things that we don't quite know how to do well yet. And if you think back to when we were young, when we were first entering school and we were like entering kindergarten, what our teachers were trying to impart on us were very simple things like, clean up after yourself, don't hit each other, tell the truth and be kind to one another. And those are things that we can do as individuals, but not really, we don't do it well as a whole. So we're especially in this century, we have a lot of challenges, and this is really our time to step up and do a lot of maturing so we can, grow up.
Yeah. I love what you said about impoverished. That word impoverished is such a beautiful word. And it reminds me of, not just like a financial status, but like when you look at all of humanity and all of the beings that exist unseen and seen in the world, it's like the areas where we're impoverished, like what do we do with all these intense emotions? And what do we do with all this suffering and heartbreak? And how do we weave in then the experience of joy and like hold all of that in the same container, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think, being economically impoverished is obviously something that can cause very serious misery, especially if you don't know how to use your mind well. But even if you have all of your material needs met, your misery can be extraordinary. So, there's a very profound impoverishment of wisdom that humanity suffers from. Luckily, we have, like you were mentioning earlier, Tibetan Buddhism, Liberating Buddhism, and a lot of other wonderful techniques that have really come to the surface for all of us to benefit from. So we're gonna learn a lot this century. So I'm excited.
Yeah. And how has that experience been working with a name that's not your birth name?
Great. I don't give it too much thought. I mean, at first, it's like kind of funny, like, I didn't want them to like think I'm a rapper or something like that, which, is totally fine. I mean, I like love hip hop, and that's kind of what I grew up on. And really one of the ways that I like learned English was listening to Biggie Smalls when I was really small. My cousins putting me onto that. But it's really has a bigger meaning for me personally. I don't give it too much thought. I mean, people can get accustomed to the craziest things, so this will be small.
And how did you transition into writing and using your words?
Yeah, so like you said earlier, I mean, I probably started the whole Young Pueblo thing back 3 years ago, and it was always about the words, but when I first started sharing, it was more so I would kind of try to attract people through just images, different pictures that I would be taking, throughout my life and different travels, different places that I would go to. And then under the pictures, I would write blurbs and essays, and, people enjoyed them. And I felt like during that time, I was still really figuring a lot of things out. I was like first introduced to meditation and like 5 years ago, back in July 2012. And, when you first start getting rid of those first few layers of the ego and start going deeper, everything seems kind of like, in the beginning, I was just like, wow, I can't even believe that I'm a little less sad than I was before, or like just like these triumphs. But as I kind of matured in my practice, a lot of things became clearer. So I started focusing my writing, and I also started seeing the success of a lot of my peers, like just like a lot of amazing writers out there, taking the main ideas or their best pieces and putting them up into blurbs, into these images that people can quickly reshare. And I was like, oh, that's great. I should totally do that, because then I can take, the main image and then under it describe what I really mean. Because, you can see something and like read something short, but you might not necessarily catch the full drift of what I'm saying unless you like really go, take time to read the full essay underneath. And other times it's just a short thing. But I don't know, I've always been quite like a minimalist. So I enjoyed that aspect of just sharing my personal art through this like highly like thin format of just black and white. And it's almost like when you go to the page, it's like almost not overwhelming, but it's pretty stunning. Just like it's so clean, black and white. And I want people to really, if they're going to come and hang out, I want them to come and hang out for the words and the depth, and to really, consider themselves, observe themselves in an introspective manner. And really, I think people make beautiful things out there, but I'm not here necessarily for like artistic beauty as opposed to like content, high quality content. So,
and going inward.
Yeah, exactly. And go as far deep inward as possible.
And how long have you been writing?
Not very long. I never thought I was going to be a writer. I always thought that my life would take me in a route of activism and just really focusing on organizing people and, better modes and better like, I mean, I feel like our humanity is so disorganized. So I think we can do a lot better to, build systems with that where we just simply aren't harming each other. So I thought I was going to be doing more of that work. But then when I started meditating back in July 2012, I did my first Vipassana course as taught by SN Goenka. And then I did 2 more pretty soon after that. And it just kind of really shook me open. And I felt this kind of deeper aspiration, this deeper mission that I kind of came with, and was like, you don't know everything, but you should share what you understand so far. And that was very clear to me. Even though what I understand will change, do your best and share. I felt like I really had to do that, And for now, yeah, I'm a writer, and I think I'm moving more towards being a speaker, but I will still keep writing, of course. And yeah, it's been quite a ride, and I really just did not see this coming at all, but happy it all worked out as such.
It's a wonderful surprise that life gives us, isn't it?
Yeah.
I wondered about any insights that you have, or that arose, whether during your Vipassana retreats or just in everyday life, sort of the difference between this outer external activism, doing things, versus the inner activism and the inner work. Because one of my favorite quotes is from the Dalai Lama, this whole idea of world peace begins with inner peace. And so I wondered if you could, expound a little bit on your experiences around that.
Definitely. So I was a part of a lot of different groups. I started organizing back when I was about 15 years old. And I was lucky enough to be with like some, work alongside amazing people. And we were often very successful. We would have these campaigns and we would, you know, target the right people that we needed to get X, Y, and Z from, and we would get what we wanted. But we kept winning, and but it just dawned on me that things weren't really substantially changing. So I was like, what's going on here?
Mm.
What do we need to do? And then I've always been fascinated by history. So I've read tons of history books and just familiarized myself with particularly American history and the 20th century and, other things, particularly around like revolutions, and just saw how, there is this big movement of people that have always wanted to create better modes of living, live in manners where we could more so share the material wealth that our earth, just gives us. But then it's always this aspect of like violence and, ego that has never been dealt with, pain that has never been dealt with, that sort of just stops the revolution in its tracks. And when I
Mm.
started doing my own personal healing, it became very clear that like I understood liberation in the external sense, but not in the internal, the internal of like my own pain, my own suffering, the burdens that I didn't even know that I was carrying, that I
Right.
would really like spend so much work, so much time running away from by just like busying myself with these external things. So
Right. Right.
it, I really believe that the two forms of liberation need to ultimately, it is the internal that liberates us, because you could, you know, if you really have equanimity, then no matter your external circumstances, you'll be happy. But ultimately, even the Buddha in his time, he would comment on society. He wasn't a fan of like caste systems, and he would teach everyone and would, tell people to be better and, be kind to one another and be compassionate towards one another. And I really think we can do a lot of that, and we can actually work towards, liberating ourselves internally and externally.
Speaking of the Buddha, one of the things that I love most about what he said was, like, don't just take my words. Like, don't just
Don't believe
don't believe anything I say. Like practice it for yourself, see for yourself, discover it for yourself. And I wondered if you could talk about that, because in my own life, personal and business, I never recommend anything that I haven't tried many, 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 many times. And I think there is
anything.
such incredible value in a world and a culture where talk is so freaking cheap, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That we have actual and precise methods that we can implement. It's not just like, be here now. Okay, well, how do I do that? It's like
Exactly.
there are very specific methods that can lead us from A to B. And like you said, you actually feel a difference. Like, whoa, I have less sadness. Like, oh my God, there's something like alchemical occurring. And so I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about what it means to have methods and an actual practice that you implement on a daily
Yes.
basis.
That's one thing that I really try to tell the people who read my stuff, that it's not just about like letting go is a big one, right? Letting go is something that I feel like more so now in 2017, like a lot of people are really trying to even grapple with the idea of letting go and even understanding that they're holding on to things. But it's not just about like thinking in your head and being like, you know what, this is bothering me and now I'm just going to let it go. That's not quite how it
Like
works.
erase it,
Yeah,
delete.
right.
It didn't exist.
And it's also not about erasing memories. A lot of people think it's like, oh, but the memory keeps coming back. And I tell people, no, it's not about them. Like the memory is going to be there, but it's the energy that's attached to the memory.
Right.
That's what we're really trying to let go of. And I tell them, and like, there are so many different practices out there. We live in a bountiful time, particularly for internal liberation. And I tell people often, when I go away to Vipassana courses, which I go to like a few times a year, but then if they don't want to do Vipassana, there's tons of other things that are out there for them. Or if some, if even if meditating itself is a little too difficult, there are other things that you can do. There are, very serious practices of yoga asanas. There's, different forms of energy healing that are really powerful. Even like, psychological, like therapeutic practices or very simple mindfulness techniques. There are just tons of little things that people can pick up and use in their daily life to just bring them back to the present moment and just start opening up that layer between the conscious and the subconscious to really start releasing all the stuff that's really been accumulated in the subconscious for such a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But a practice is really critical. you need something. Like you need, and I tell people this example of like, look at the houses that we live in. Look at the world that we've constructed, these beautiful buildings. We've used tools to build them. So if you want to build a palace of peace inside of yourself, you need a tool. You need something to build it with.
Mm-hmm.
And simple introspection, just simply turning the lens inward is very helpful, because that's how we start. We're like, oh wow, like I'm sad right now. But then what do we do about that sadness? What do we do about this anxiety? Then you find a tool, one that really meets you where you're at. And I tell people, if you find something, it's good for you if it challenges you and but it doesn't overwhelm you. And that's going to be your thing. That's going to be something that helps you really build your inner peace and cultivate your wisdom.
I wonder if we could talk a little bit about lineage and if that's important to you, because I see, like you say, in a world full of incredible tools, one sort of question that I feel like people aren't asking or tuning into is, where did it come from? And like the person who is teaching it to me, do I want to be like them? Like seeing evidence of something working. Is there anything you could add to that?
Yeah, we have to be really careful and really respectful, because appropriation is a pretty damaging force in our society. So we don't want to just like take something that has been around for a few thousand years and then just like totally forget where it came from, and then just like put a price tag on it and sell it, in a very like Western mode. So I think respecting lineages is very, very important, because you have to remember that these lineages have lasted for so long because they've been successful. So when we tamper with them and start changing them, and then like taking this part of this lineage and that part of this other one and trying to combine it all together, because that's another thing that Americans are really fond of, is just like, it's like, oh, I know a little bit of this, a little bit of that, so I'm just going to bring it all together into this one thing. And like, sure, that may be helpful sometimes, but for like very powerful purification methods, it's important to respect, where it's coming from, understand where it's coming from, and, not to just like appropriate it, but to treat it gently and respectfully. So like, I'm really grateful so like I was saying, my lineage comes from Esen Goenka, and it's been around for 2,500 years. It comes from Burma. There were teachers before him, and it's just been a technique that has helped many thousands of people for, 2,500 years since the Buddha was around. So I'm really grateful for all those who have kept this lineage alive.
And aside from your own personal experiences, which are of course the most powerful distillation of self proof, when you started doing Vipassana, were you observing the people who were teaching it to you, or observing other people who were going to Vipassana retreats saying like, wow, yeah, there is something different about them, like that method must work?
That's a great question. So I remember the first course that I took, there were a few things that were quite stunning to me. And one was there's the great teacher, which is Esen Goenka, who like, we all do courses under him and his teaching method all over the world. But then there are assistant teachers who are there to like answer your questions, and people who've been, practicing Vipassana for like a few decades at least.
Wow.
And I remember the teacher that I had, this guy, like, I had never seen someone like this before. And I was like, is this guy even touching the ground? I'm like, like he'd be walking, and he'd be walking with such peace, such intention. And at the time I didn't understand, but now I'm pretty sure that he was just practicing sampajana, which is like really maintaining the awareness of impermanence throughout the body, and just being constantly aware of impermanence. So when you do that, you're like, you kind of have to move pretty slowly and pretty calmly so that you can, keep that awareness there. But when I was watching him, in my first course, I had no idea what he was doing. And then the times that I asked him questions, and he was just like, I was like, wow, this guy's like superhuman. So that was really kind of inspiring to me. And then there were a bunch of other things that happened to me personally, things that I really, as an organizer and as a person of color, there was so much personal animosity that I had towards white men in particular. And I remember just like towards the end of that 10-day course, a lot of that just burning away, and this deep realization coming forward that even that enemies don't exist. And the second one is that everyone, even those who do so much harm, they also need to be liberated. And these two things helped me just lose so much of the weight and tension that I had been carrying, in my work, and had sort of adopted from just like history.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but the technique really, it's crazy how much it works. Like I've my wife practices and I practice. We've both been doing it for about 5 years, and a bunch of my friends practice, and it is insane how much we've all changed. And we all love it because it's so fun. And I mean, it's fun as in like it's really hard, but but you just keep going because you just nothing teaches you at that rate or that speed. You just learn so fast. So it's really, I find it fun.
Yeah, it makes me think about all the different influences that are in our culture today and how media has just like, gotten in there and really affected people's mind streams and the way that they see the world and, how all of our perceptions are formed and
Yeah.
versus like really tuning into our own hearts and knowing like what is it that I actually know from my own personal
Mhm.
experience. And so, what has your experience been of that? I mean, you're in New York, you're subject to a lot of stimuli and a lot of people.
Yeah, it was funny. Someone just asked me that question today. And I haven't gotten a chance to respond to him yet, but he asked me, he's like, I know you meditate, I know you're a spiritual person, but like, why do you live in New York? As if like New York is the polar opposite. And I thought the same thing too, but now the way I see it after really maturing in my practice and not like, I don't feel like it's just going to be taken away. Like I meditate every day, twice a day. And it just, I think what better place to be in, to be like in New York, a place that's full of, so much misery, so much craving, such deep craving people have here in
Mm-hmm.
particular, because, every people come to New York to like make their dreams come true. But a lot of times their dreams are social expectations as opposed to real personal aspirations. But it's a great place to constantly practice compassion, to practice maintaining my own internal calmness, my own internal peace, as there's like the chaos swirling around me,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to move mindfully through the city makes the city super magical. So
It
like
is.
I have a bunch of friends who also live in the city and do fantastic work and also meditate vipassana, and other people who meditate, like I have a few friends who like meditate in the Tibetan Buddhist lineage, and it's just magic.
Mm-hmm.
It's so fun to be here and not, because we also have misery. Like it takes a lot of work to be fully liberated, but to live here in a way where you're like not struggling as intensely on the inside, it's a great joy. I mean, I think it's a great place to like, you know, live in a huge city. But at the same time, I don't think, the emergence of all these spiritual practices, like really going global and because of the globalization of the world and how everything has really become, this like really united place that you can get so much access from. I think the beautiful thing that's happening is that, monks used to be able to maintain these lineages and they've done such a service to us, but it's really now reaching out to householders and people who have families, who have children, who have businesses, and I think that's the
Mm-hmm.
beautiful part is that, we need to use these lineages, respect them, use them
Yeah.
properly, but not run away from the world. We're here, we're part of the world. Like, and I personally don't have a desire to become a monk, but that doesn't mean that I can't work on my own liberation.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of my teachers, the 17th Karmapa, and when the first time he came to the US and he was talking to everyone saying like, guys, the days of being in the cave are over.
Yeah.
Like it's time to like do your meditation practice in the morning and then get out there in the world.
Yeah.
And I find that really inspiring. So you meditate twice a day,
Yep.
in the morning and in the evening, or what's your
Yeah.
schedule?
I do a minimum of 2 hours a day. I do 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the evening. And if I have more time and also have the will to, I'll meditate a little more. And it's really dramatically changed my life.
I'm sure.
Yeah, it's really cool the way, when you're sleeping, you are actually having tons of reactions. Like either, how your subconscious is connected to your sensations.
Mm-hmm.
So your subconscious never really sleeps. And if you think about when you're like cold at night and you're asleep, you'll like pull up the blanket on you. Or when you're like really hot, you'll like take it off and you'll wake up and there'll be no blanket on you. And this is because, your subconscious is constantly feeling what's happening. So on the same level, when you're dreaming, you'll like start dreaming about the things that you're craving or the things that you dislike, and you'll be developing tons and tons of these reactions that really accumulate in the subconscious. So when you wake up in the morning, it's a perfect time to clear out everything that you were developing while you were asleep. And then at the end of the day, in the evening, you take time to clear out all of the accumulations that you've built up during the day while you've been working and, being around other people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And do you find also that, of course, your 2 meditation sessions a day bleed into your everyday life, where you're, say, like walking towards a train and you find yourself walking in a particular way that you're not thinking, or that you're aware of what's around you?
Yeah, I think it helps a ton. It's really sort of changed just the way I exist around other people. I'm not sure, like, if you're familiar with the practice of metta. So I think when I'm in the train, I feel like it's always a perfect time to just give metta, just like, support the liberation and freedom and share my merits with all beings. And I'm always trying to give metta to people. Like at the end of every post, I'm sending my love to them, and I'm always supporting their freedom and their happiness intentionally.
Right.
And just sort of just like walking through the world with metta is like such a joy and such a like, I'd much rather like walk through the world peacefully like that, or try my best to walk peacefully, than to like walk around with all the tension and anxiety that I used to walk around. So it's really definitely transformed the way in my mind, the contents of my mind, and just how I respond to everything around me. And like, I'm not saying I'm perfect. Like I still, get upset. I still like have tough days, but it definitely, particularly the idea and the understanding and actually able to feel the impermanence of everything, has helped me just, really just understand that when tough times come, they'll pass, they'll change too.
Mm-hmm. I feel like I'm channeling a Vipassana retreat here. I have this like fly that's like flying around, landing on my face, which is always what I think of, like doing the Vipassana retreat in Thailand or something, and it's hot and the bugs are landing on you, and you're
you're doing great though.
Yeah, so I wondered if we could talk about the heart and heartbreak, and how that comes into practice, one's own practice, and writing, and how our own emotional history is impacting our present behavior.
Definitely.
Or even just to ask you, like if we were just to like get into the dirt and look at like, what are those things in our lives that have just, either been so painful that they just propel us into a desire for more practice, or for a personal realization or awakening.
That's what I was gonna go right into, is that there are so many stories of people losing a loved one, or having a very serious breakup, from a long-term relationship, or losing a very important friend, or something happening that just propels them into, just seeking more out of life, and the things that I can buy and own and see and touch and feel, and just going, deeper inward to build some type of like stabilizing force inside of you. Because the reality is, like, why should you spend so much time building inner peace? Is because you can't control everything that's happening around you. Like, things are always changing. They're going to continue to change. So, you got to get ready. Like, you got to do something to like help yourself out in the long run. But definitely, it's just, I mean, for me personally, I think I have always like kind of struggled with depression in the past. And I think that was what was really eye-opening to me, was sort of just getting exhausted with, being sad so often. And like, I've always been a pretty external person, and, like externally, like not like happy, but like externally, like smiling and active and making jokes and being around people, going to parties. But behind all of that was just like this deep, like sadness and lack of self-acceptance, and sort of just getting to the point where I was like exhausted, and, and treating my body so poorly that I was like, just doing different drugs and just like abusing my body through intoxicants, and just hitting that point where I'm like, all right, well, I'm done with all of that. And when I started just sort of cleaning up my act and really like eating better and taking less intoxicants, and then I knew that I needed something more. And luckily, a friend of mine was traveling in India, and he like accidentally stumbled upon a Vipassana course, and he did it. And when he came out, this is someone that I went to college with, when he came out, all he could talk about was love, compassion, and goodwill. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, that's what I need, so I signed up to one in the United States, but it was at a time when, because of my suffering, it had moved me into a place where I was like, okay, well, I need more. I need something deeper out of life. And I'm luckily was grateful enough to, have it.
Mm. Let's talk about self-love and self-acceptance.
Yeah.
And yeah, so for our listeners who are like totally like on the same page with you, they're totally getting what you're saying. How do we move? What are some of the methods that you use to move more into a deeper and deeper space of self-love and acceptance?
I think what's really helped me is because this like eruption of self-love has been quite beautiful over these past 5 years that I'm sure we've both witnessed. And I think clarifying it for myself and just trying to understand what self-love is has helped me have more sort of power and courage to do my own self-healing. And I think to me, it's like that the simplest definition that I use of self-love is doing what you need to do to be free. I see that generally in the like sort of like wider popular mode, self-love is understood as body positivity, which I think is like critically important. Of course, I think you should absolutely accept your body as it is, but your self-love shouldn't stop there. It should go deeper. It should go into interacting with your emotional history. That's all bundled up inside of your subconscious, and that needs observation and release for you to be truly happy and peaceful. So being able to, use that self-love as a thing that can give you more courage, that can help you go out there to seek new tools, and really just like, because I really think see self-love as an energy. It's an energy that you use to heal yourself. And to me, it's like, it's just so important and so beautiful that so many people are like actively trying to love themselves and like seeing their own limits of their love.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's these movements, like I think you said before when you were reading my bio, like how a lot of my writing is sort of focused around going from self-love and converting that and evolving that into unconditional love for yourself and all beings.
Mm-hmm.
And that literally wouldn't be possible if you at first did not give yourself the love and the time and the acceptance and just the attention that you really need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the favorite things that I learned from so many years of meditation is that the observation is the dissolution. And
Mm,
I think that that's sort of like this little, secret that meditators seem to know, that like it's that easy, that there isn't anything to fight against, that when you just observe, say like a non-self-loving, like a self-sabotage or,
mhm,
non-self-accepting thing comes up, that just by like observing it, it changes shape and form and can dissolve. It's like, holy crap, that is like genius, brilliant. And like in a world where we're all experiencing so many intense emotions, that
mhm.
all I have to do is just like watch it and it's going to change form magically. Like that's insane, right? And so I wondered if you wanted to talk about that in your own experience.
Yeah, in my own experience. I also have this story that I heard about the Buddha that really brings to mind because that was like the thing that we hear of Vipassana and that the Buddha used to say often is just observe. Like just observe. Don't think about it too hard. Just literally just observe. Follow the directions I gave you and do nothing else. And there's a story, and I'm probably not saying it fully correctly, but there were like these four scholars who were about to take a course with the Buddha, and like the Buddha, and during the Buddha's time, the courses were all like, you would start at 45 days long during the rainy season. And so like these four scholars are going, and then there's this really old woman from this town who couldn't even go, who couldn't even walk herself there, had to be carried there. And at the end of the course, she reached full enlightenment. She was an arahant. She was totally liberated. And the four scholars hadn't even gotten to the first stage of enlightenment. And they asked her, they're like, what happened? Like the Buddha gave you some special technique or, what's going on? And she was like, no. She was like, I just did exactly what he told me to do. And I just observed. But these people, because they were scholars, they were just like thinking so hard. And to me, the moral of the story is like, one is understand that your ability to intellectualize is part of the reason that, is part of the thing that's causing you your suffering. It's because you're thinking so hard. You're like, your thoughts, are very valuable, it is our ability to intellectualize that built this world that we have. But at the same time, it's the disharmony that we see in the world is also built by our ability to intellectualize. And literally our freedom and us being able to liberate ourselves will come from our direct experience. And that's really coming from our ability to feel as opposed to think. And that's something that we really have to understand as a global people, is that my thoughts will literally not liberate me. It's my direct experience. And yeah, what was the other part of the question? I forget. Missed something.
The observation is the dissolution, but I think you covered it. One thing that came up as you were talking is, okay, so in terms of language, like feel, as in perceive, observe, be aware of, senses, and this notion of feelings. And I think as Westerners, we tend to like, there's a fine line between like feel all the feels and chasing our feelings and then thinking about it some more and trying to figure it out, and then following our feelings. There's like a, wondering if in your own experience you can talk about the difference between feeling perceiving and like feeling, and the sort of like the dangers of entrapment of following your feelings and believing that they're truth.
Yeah, you're going deep. That's a really important one. So personally, from my experience, and I don't know, this might not be a popular thing to say, but it's definitely been something that's been made very clear from my personal meditation practice, is that the emotions that I feel are all egoic reactions. Like literally, so like whether it's like a deep happiness, or not like happiness, but like that like gleeful joy, or a sadness or anxiety, it's different. It's actually the external world interacting with what's happening in my mind, and my ego just literally, reacting and being like, oh, this makes me happy, that makes me sad, this gives me pleasure, that gives me joy, like this gives me, fear. And the observation, the ability to perceive that we're talking about, is literally what I would call awareness. And that is another function of the mind that doesn't involve the ego. It's really just our mind's ability to sort of clarify our perception. So are you aware of like the five aggregates, like the 5 parts of the mind?
Mm-hmm.
So one of them is perception. And a lot of what we're doing when we're meditating is that we're taking our perception, which is essentially composed of all of our conditioning, all of our ego, and
filters.
Exactly. And converting that, all the stories, converting that into wisdom. So literally releasing all of that conditioning, and literally taking, your sanya, in our lineage, we would say you're converting your sanya into your panya, and just taking perception and literally converting it into wisdom. And it's tough because, to people, it's like they're just coming to terms with even acknowledging their emotions, and acknowledging the existence of the ego, and acknowledging these things. So that I give a lot of respect to, is like, you first have to even be okay with turning that lens inward and just witnessing what's there. Yeah. It takes a while for you to even then realize, like, oh crap, this thing that I'm feeling is actually, it's not even real. It's not even like this, like, this like satisfaction, or like momentary satisfaction, or this dissatisfaction. It's all coming from just different things pushing and pulling and touching my ego. And then you come to realize that now, there's a deeper awareness, because I give people a simple map when I give my talks about the way the mind is shaped. And I tell them to, see and visualize their consciousness as something that's pure, like the sun, and radiating with love and compassion. And then the ego is all of our conditioning, just this massive cloud of stories of, pain, traumas, desires, cravings, that just sort of surrounds itself like clouds around the sun. And our healing work is just taking this cloud and just getting rid of, these clouds that have accumulated themselves around our consciousness. And as we let go of all of that, we have clarity, we have awareness, and we can love very powerfully and give compassion without tiring ourselves out.
Reminds me of one of my teachers, one of my Tibetan Buddhist teachers, Garchen Rinpoche, one day years ago when I was with him, and he was explaining about how, no one can make you feel happy. Like he was saying, energy moves through a certain channel and you feel joy. Energy moves through another channel and you feel sadness. Energy moves through another channel and you feel anger. And it was like, in the moment, I was like initially sort of like so disappointed. You know, it was
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
that doesn't fall in line with my like Disney,
Yeah.
like fall in love and, you know, experience inseparability with another person. Like that just didn't, you know, the worlds kind of collided at that moment. But then it also is incredibly liberating and freeing that, like, as another one of my teachers says, you can cure poison with poison. So like we may have an emotion like rage that we feel is like really violent or has some sort of quality about it that's dangerous. And yet, if we're able to sit with it and just watch it and watch it and watch it and see all the different qualities and how it manifests in the body and the mind and what it does, that there's another side to that coin. And that, like you said, there's this tremendous, like, for example, with rage, there's a tremendous clarity that arises. Like, literally, you experience it in your body and mind if you can get to the other side of observing it and it, you know, changing form. And that's like a lot of dedication. Like, that's a lot of, like, you know, pouring your heart into that kind of practice. And to say, like, my number one priority in life is this type of awakening is a pretty bold move. You know, talk about that for you. Like, is that a, you know, one day it happened, or that's like every day your commitment, like, you know, your number one priority, awakening yourself by yourself?
Yeah. One thing before I go into that, I wanted to talk about how, so I do believe in happiness. I think there are a lot of different emotions that we feel that we like think are happiness. I think a lot of times happiness is confused with having our pleasures fulfilled and excitement.
Mm-hmm.
I think in reality, happiness is the absence of craving.
Mm-hmm.
So it's when craving ends or when craving is not present in the mind. And happiness actually feels much more like a real profound calmness, you know, and not this like busyness that the mind is always constantly propelled, you know, it's constantly like flowing around with. But I really see happiness as the absence of craving. And that's something that only you can cultivate yourself. I think people around you, I actually wrote about that today, people around you can support your happiness, you know, by helping you, you know, by supporting your bodily needs, you know, like by being good friends and family members and not causing you any harm. But those things, even though they may give you those things, that will not make you happy. You know, it's the cultivation of your own mental strength that will really bring you that happiness. But I think for me personally was when I realized that one, that misery could end. And that's something that you can actually heal yourself. Not that like healing is going to last forever, because I see that's like a common thing that a lot of people will say is like, you know, it never ends. That's not true. You know, everything arises, everything passes away. The same way that one day there was no universe and then the next day there was a universe, one day there will also be no universe. You know, same thing. I didn't exist before, currently I'm existing, and eventually I won't exist. It's the same thing for our traumas, our pain, all of our conditioning that causes us burdens. You know, though it may take multiple lifetimes, eventually it will pass away. But when I realized that there could be an end to this road, you know, an end to like suffering itself, I was like, heck yeah. I was like, what am I gonna do? Am I gonna just like continue just messing around and like living this life? And you know, and I was living a fine life, but just totally not happy, not, I just couldn't say no to wisdom, especially when I've always really enjoyed learning. And then I finally was given a technique that, like I tell people, like I went to like a pretty good college, and in the 10 days that I did at the Vipassana course, I felt like I learned far more in 10 days than I did in 4 years. And you know, I could not give that up. I was just like, though this is hard, though it's very difficult to constantly see myself and just constantly break through all the illusions that are literally forming my identity, I can't give that up. So, you know, and I may not be fully liberated in this lifetime. So what, you know, but just it's a path that's very beautiful and is immediately rewarding. So I'm going to keep going because, you know, ultimately, if you like take the Dharma very seriously, you will be successful. So, yeah.
Such a relief to know that, right?
Yeah, totally. I keep trying. It's all
It's like
effort.
there's a way out. There is a way out.
There is a way out, and you know, don't worry about it too much. Just do the technique. If you got a good technique, just focus on that.
I wanted to grab one of your writings from your Instagram. There's so many. I love every single one of them, but I just sort of Russian roulette went to one. It says, don't run away from heavy emotions. Honor
Yeah.
the anger. Give pain the space it needs to breathe. This is how we let go. And I wondered if you might be able to add a few words about, when you talk about in terms of like giving pain the space it needs to breathe, but also like the function of breathing in the body and
Mm-hmm.
breathing as a form of meditation. And
Mm-hmm.
what is a method that you use personally, bringing in your breath to give more space to those heavy emotions?
That's a beautiful question. Thank you for, I think you even explained it yourself when you were talking about rage. So, in terms of breathing, so when we go to the Vipassana courses, the first 3 days, you focus on this technique called Anapanasati, which is the awareness of the natural breath. And that is something, so we just do that for 3 days and it helps build the concentration of the mind. And then we go to the Vipassana technique that helps actually purify the contents of the mind. But it's something that we use really often, especially when times get tough. So there are times when you're purifying yourself and these huge accumulations come up from deep within the mind and they cause storms. You literally feel like your mind is wild. Your mind, you could be like releasing anxiety, but then you like literally are feeling that anxiety as it's on its way out.
Come
And
up to come out.
yeah, and
Right.
sometimes that's a bit hectic. So, holding that space for yourself, we literally use the natural breath as our anchor, and just observing that helps really concentrate the mind. And it's actually through the breath that we can become masters of our mind. So there's two different ideas here where like if you really are able to build your concentration through the observance of the natural breath, then you will eventually become the master of your mind. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you will be fully liberated from all, lifetimes, because it requires the wisdom that we need, through being the master of our mind and really like taking our mind and focusing it on wisdom. Then we can liberate ourselves. And the wisdom being, perceiving the actual impermanence of all things. And it's just so important because like when you're feeling all these different things happening inside you, it's not about just being positive, because that's like a big thing. It's like people are really learning to be positive, which is important, but when you're doing these practices, you need to hold space for whatever is coming up and not be picking and choosing, just literally like, okay, this is anxiety now, like literally noting it, like this is anxiety. Okay, you keep practicing your technique, keep practicing. Okay, the anxiety is still there, keep practicing, and then eventually it passes away, it releases. But if you don't hold space for it as it is, then you could multiply it or put it back in, or but yeah, it really
Suppress
requires,
it.
yeah, suppress it. But it just really requires holding space for yourself to be able to really let go. And I kind of hesitated about putting that one up because that one really requires the space of like actually having a technique. But I knew like a lot of the people who read my writing, they do meditate and they do other things. So I think at least some people would understand that, what I meant in terms of like, holding space for yourself. And because it's not just about, just you feel it, but also you need some type of technique to help really get it out.
Definitely. I love what you were saying about things coming up to come out and seeing them on their way out. I think
Yeah.
so often when we get into like a really intense emotion, it feels like it's going to last forever. And right, it's just like human nature. And it's such a relief, I think, to know or to have an experience of a practice where, let's say, something arises and you watch it until it goes away. And then something arises again and you watch it, that over time you actually notice that those cycles get shorter. Like in my own practice, I used to write in a little notebook, like, I was doing like Vajrasattva purification practices. And I knew that if I did my practice in the morning, by like 2 or 3 in the afternoon, I would just like fly off the handle for like no good reason, right?
Yeah.
It's just all this stuff purifying in my
Just
mind. And so I would like write in my notebook when were the times that I got really angry. And it would start out like something might last in my system for like 3 days, subtle,
Mhm.
subtle levels, but like resentful. I was like under the surface. And then it was like 2 days and 1 day and 5 hours and 2 hours and 1 hour. And like to the point where, you know, you really notice a reduction in discursive emotions and thought. And I think that's such a, oh my God, it's like revolutionary that
Yeah.
there are actually methods that you can train in that will show you directly that they're working. It's not just a wish for like a wish or an I hope or like a prayer, it's just
Right.
so much. And I love how the Buddha said that if we were aware of every single breath from the moment we woke up until the moment we went to sleep, that would we be, fully enlightened with purifying, like, all the poisons and a knower of the three times, the past, present, future. And so one question I have for you is, when you're working with your community and the people that you talk to, and you can say like this, like the first 3 days of your Vipassana practice, that you're observing the natural breath as it is without any changes. What do you say to that person that's like, yeah, but that's just too freaking simple. Like I'm just like, really, I'm just breathing. Like, shouldn't there be a more complicated technique? Shouldn't there be like, fireworks and like crazy experiences and like
Moving your energy here and there and like doing all this stuff. Yeah, I mean, so like I'm not a meditation teacher. That's why I put it up there. Like I'm just a meditator and a writer. But I do, have talked to a lot of my friends and a lot of people online who've like heard about Vipassana through me, and or have heard about it but have been encouraged, to go do it. And I let them know that like one of their big things is that, wow, 10 days is such a long time. And I'm like, yeah, it is. It's a long time and it's a lot of work. But you've also, because the idea of even being silent or even just like watching your breath for 3 days and observing your body for 7 days and, spending so much time with yourself, well, it was like, to me, it's like, well, you know how to read, you know how to write, you like, you work every day, you've been living your life forever. So why not take 10 days to really do something different? I tweeted something yesterday about how, some people travel all over the world for an experience, but then they don't even think to just like close their eyes and start observing themselves. And that's where like the real journey begins. And I know a lot of people do these things in preparation, everyone's sort of in a different place, but the real journey begins when you really start observing yourself. And I'm always encouraging my friends, like, if you spent your whole life reading and writing and doing math and, doing these things that all revolve around intellectualizing, then, you can totally make 10 days for yourself. Not only that it will benefit you and decrease your burdens, but you will literally cultivate other parts of your mind, literally cultivating your equanimity, cultivating your awareness, cultivating your wisdom, because that's something that from day to day we don't get time. Our society doesn't support these things, so we need to make time for it ourselves. But I'm always encouraging people because if you really want to be free and if you really suffered, then you will understand that it does take some effort to build a whole new you, going through these like series of transformations. And that's a wonderful thing. I like how you were pointing out, it takes less and less time. The anger, like, it decreases and decreases and decreases. And that might change. That you might, you go deeper, deeper, deeper in your mind, and there's a huge chunk of anger that comes up in days. But that's good because it's like, whoa, I'm even deeper in my mind.
right.
But that's the beautiful thing, is that so many people talk about the authentic self, like, I really want to be like my real self. And I get that, having a level of honesty and courage to be able to be who you think you are, but don't make that limit you in a way where you're like forcing yourself to be one way, but just really allow yourself to transform. Because I feel like if you're really being authentic, then that's a combination of two things: being honest and allowing yourself to transform, because we're constantly changing. There's nothing about this reality that is still. It's all constantly changing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So precious. So I just occurred to me to dial it back for anybody who's listening who doesn't know what a Vipassana retreat is. You want to just like give the bottom line on that, and
Oh, sure.
where you would recommend,
Checking
people.
it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Vipassana is a technique that originates from the Buddha. So it's a technique that the Buddha gave people when he was around back 2,500 years ago. And there are a lot of different forms of Vipassana out there. The one that I prefer personally is SN Goenka's. You can you can get more information at dhamma.org, dhamma.org. And people are commonly used to the word Dharma, but Dhamma is Pali, ancient Pali, and that's the language that the Buddha spoke when he was around.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really powerful technique. It's 10 days of your life, completely silent, no reading, no writing. It's definitely some serious work, but if you're looking for a deep transformation, it's definitely the right place to go. There are meditation centers all over the world, and they're free. So you go and you don't pay, you're not forced to pay anything to go. At the end of the course, you can donate if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's only if you want to and if you have the means to. No one, if you leave there without paying any money, no one will bat an eye, no one will be upset with you, because that was the way we try our best to really do it, the way the Buddha did it back when he was around. And he never charged for anything. But if people do want to give donations, then they're definitely free to. Oh, and one thing I wanted to tell you was, you said you were practicing Tibetan Buddhism, and I just learned that Goenka and the Dalai Lama were friends.
Oh,
Yeah, it was so cool, and they really enjoyed each other's presence.
but of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. It's interesting because as a Buddhist, I never considered Buddhism a religion. I considered
Right.
it more like a map, a framework, a practice, a method, a tool
Exactly.
of awakening. And I think people who aren't familiar with, like when you say the Buddha, it's sort of like we may overlay other ideas of religion, like, oh,
Yes.
it's like I'm like kowtow, like I am kowtow. What am I saying? Just glorifying someone who
Yeah.
lived 2,500 years ago, and then that was it. And I think what a lot of people don't know is that thousands of people have become enlightened. That Sakyamuni Buddha, through his own, by oneself one attains, he attained enlightenment, but that like thousands of people became enlightened, and that the whole
Yeah.
the whole deal about the practice is like, and I'm going to be just like him, right?
Yeah. Right. Exactly. It's not like we just like worship the Buddha. It's not at all. Actually, I think in Vipassana particularly, we really see the Buddha as a scientist. I think the same way we look at Einstein and like, Galileo and like all the other people who have like really delivered something powerful for humanity. Like Newton discovered calculus and Einstein with relativity. I think in the same manner, the Buddha profoundly understood the mind and profoundly understood the way to liberate the mind and to end all suffering. And I think absolutely there's been like religions and different like rites and rituals built around the Buddha and his character and his life. But in reality, he was just here, he just found something that was really, really useful for people. And when people immediately started using it, like in his lifetime, thousands and thousands of people were fully liberated. After thousands of people were liberated, and even now there are people who are entering nirvana, reaching these heights of liberation. And I think it's only going to become more and more common as these really powerful techniques that have been around for thousands of years continue spreading and people really keep using them, because you don't have to be a monk to be liberated. You can really enter different stages of liberation as a householder.
Right.
So,
and then come back, right?
Yeah,
Some of these people coming back, which is really cool.
Yeah, it's really cool because like, you go away for these courses, but you don't stay there. You go away for 10 days, 20 days, 30 days, 45 days. But yeah, you come back to your life and you continue giving your love and the wisdom that you accrued, and supporting the well-being of all people.
One last question, and that's about death. It's a topic, that's not very sexy in the US. We like to pretend that it's never going to happen. That it doesn't exist, and just really not to even look at it. Like it's just not going to happen. So anything you can offer in terms of like how your practice has helped you face the real possibility of death, and how that's helped you live in a more expansive way?
That's funny. That's not one that I like write about. I think I like write about like a small amount of like what I'm actually experiencing when I'm meditating. Like my teacher Goenka used to say this thing that only now I'm really feeling. And he would say that every moment you're dying, every moment you're being reborn, and you're literally dying all the time. And he's like, reincarnation is not real. It's actually a constant stream of birth and death. And even though you're in this body, it's just happening so fast that you're constantly dying, that it's the same with, that moment of like when your body actually dies, there's a birth that follows right after that. And I think that idea and like feeling that arising and passing away in my body happening all the time has profoundly helped me just make best use of my time now. So it's not that I think about death, and I like definitely, still grapple with like my own fear of mortality, still feel that arising in me every now and then. But it's made like the different feeling of just like feeling how these atoms are literally like dying, coming back inside of me has made me just like really appreciate the present. It's like, why worry about the past? Why worry about the future? Let me just, do my best in this current moment. And of course, you should always like, plan long term, like take care of your family, like, take care of your duties as best as you can. But to fear death and to fear something that you don't know like when it's going to happen, you're much better off like practicing now. Like now I have an opportunity to like really be here. Like I don't know what realm I'm going to end up in, after this life. So let me like make best use of the techniques I have now. Let me like love my wife as best as I can and love my family as best as I can, and just enjoy, just like enjoy what's happening.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Wow. This has been an incredible time spending with you.
Yeah, it's been so fun.
I'm so proud of you as like a fellow practitioner. I'm so proud of you and all of your
Likewise.
efforts, and I dedicate your merit to all beings, that we may all awaken swiftly. And I wanted to remind the listeners that you have a book out,
Yep.
Inward. Is there any experience you want to share about the book coming out, or why everyone should have this book and what it will give to them?
It's fun. I mean, so like I just released the book on Thursday, and it's available on Amazon. If you type in Inward and Young Pueblo, YUNGPUEBLO, it will immediately pop up. And I think it's worthwhile getting. I think the feedback that I've gotten from people who already have it and have already gotten a copy, they seem to be thoroughly enjoying it. I think I, just did my best over the past 3 years and figuring out different things that were really important to say, because I felt like a lot of what I do with my writing is just sort of redefine things, redefine what is like strength, what is love, like what is like happiness. I think reconceptualizing things away from like the material Western format that we're usually given, like because when you think about the word freedom in an American sense, like it's like that, like you know this like strange idea of freedom of just being able to buy whatever you want, and like that's not freedom. Like freedom is like the absence of craving. Freedom is like my ability to like actually feel peace. I think helping people reconceptualize these things, that's the real purpose of the book. And it's also just like a sample of kind of what I've been thinking about, and then just the different ideas that I've traversed through while I've been cultivating my own freedom over these past 3 years. So yeah, I hope it serves a lot of people.
I really appreciate your humility, and I'm just going to say it that I think everyone should get this book because it's so rare. It's so rare that there are people out there whose work I trust implicitly. And I think it says something that before this interview, I had never met you, and yet I 100% fully implicitly trust your work. And so
Oh, thank you.
I highly recommend getting the book and also checking out Diego's work on his Instagram account at Young Pueblo. And do you have a website as well, or is the best place for people to find you on Instagram?
I actually recently shut down my website because there have been so many changes over the past like 2 years that I have to like completely revamp it. But if you want to come hang out, Instagram's definitely the best spot. Or if you want like the real like polished version, because there are so many. I combined the book to have like poems and quotes and essays,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really like the best of the best. So if you really want to hang out, definitely get the book. But yeah, on Instagram would be great.
And one last little tidbit, if anybody out there is like really longing to write something but is kind of afraid to, do you have any like writing prompts or questions or things that you'd throw out there that people could, you know, get off the podcast and just practice right now?
I think it's so important to share your truth. Like I know like the vast majority of the world, we're a bunch of people who are not liberated, but that doesn't matter. Like you still have a lot to give. So if you feel this like aspiration and willingness to share something that's been very special and important to you, I highly, highly recommend it. And I think it's really important to cultivate your own voice. I think that took me a while as a writer. So like find out your own voice and find out the best platform for you to do it on. I think like doing it on social media gives us a lot of power. So like I encourage that, share your work there, and people will come across or like really appreciate your work. But totally do it. It'll benefit all of us. I think sharing our stories is dramatically powerful, and that's really how we learn. I think that's the purpose of like books in general, is like, what is it but shared stories? And what do we do when we speak on the phone or when we speak like online? We're just constantly sharing stories. So share what's happened to you, share what you know. It'll benefit all of us.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your story. It is very powerful. Really appreciate you being here with us. Again, if you want to check out Diego's work, check him out on Instagram at Young Pueblo.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to The Flower Lounge. I'm Katie Hess, and we'll be releasing a new podcast every Wednesday. If you like what you heard, or you know someone who might be touched by our conversation, share it with them. And don't forget to subscribe. To find out what your favorite flowers mean about you, take the quiz at LOTUSWEI.com.